Good morning. Good morning. Hope you're off to a great day wherever you are. I'm speaking to you live on Monday morning. You may be watching this on Tuesday, Wednesday, even Thursday, Friday. No judgment here from SmartHER News. But I just wanted to jump on real quick as we get started with a brand new week and get you filled in on some news that happened over the weekend and really late on Friday, because we had a lot of developments. And just to set a foundation for the week ahead and some of the headlines you might be seeing, I just wanted to jump on, have a quick chat with you about a couple different topics, a variety of different topics, in fact. One of the things I've talked about a lot on SmartHER News, and you've heard this repeatedly, is you always have to be aware of late Friday releases. So these are press releases that go out late on a Friday, and oftentimes they can be held back from the news cycle of the week, by a company, by a politician, because they don't want it to get a lot of attention. And they feel like if they release it late on a Friday, then everyone's sort of busy. And no one's really into the news cycle. And by Monday morning, there's something new to start with. And so it's easy to not get attention if it's something that they don't want to get a lot of attention. That can happen. That can be strategic. But we can also just get news on a Friday. Sometimes, news just breaks on a Friday. And that's sort of what we saw in a couple different areas. So it can both be strategic to see news released late on a Friday. And often you can kind of tell that if the information was available earlier in the week, but it wasn't actually released. And by the way, like I said, companies, politicians, all political stripes have done this. It's not, one party or the other. It's often a strategy that we see, but sometimes we just see news released because news comes in. And we got a lot of news that came in late on a Friday. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that. We're going to start, though, with the American dream. We're going to end with the American dream. And those are two good ways to kind of bookend our news report today. And what I want to start with is the passing of Naomi Judd, famous member of the Judds, a mother-daughter country music duo that was Grammy Award winning, sold tens of millions of records. And one of the things I'm really struck by is the tenacity that it took for Naomi Judd to make it. She was pregnant in high school. She ended up moving to LA very young, getting pregnant again, working a bunch of different jobs. She was a waitress. She was a secretary. She did all of these things, ended up on welfare, found her way to a nursing degree, and later became a nurse in Nashville, where she was able to get the break with her daughter that ended up skyrocketing her entire career. She has, over the years, struggled with mental illness. She's talked a lot about this in the past. The family just wanted to note this because you may see her death being categorized in a lot of different ways. So far, the family has only said that they've lost their mother to mental illness or mental disease. And so they're not being very specific on that, but she did pass away this weekend just before the duo was going to be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. There is an interesting tie-in to other news as well, because Naomi Judd actually had hepatitis C. And they thought that she contracted hepatitis C during her time as a nurse, because hepatitis C can be transmitted through blood. And so that was an illness that she struggled with over the years. And so we linked a couple articles on our website, some really interesting tributes to her. And it's worth a read just to remind yourself of what someone can persevere to. And of course, she also had this very open discussion about some of her struggles as well. The reason why hepatitis is in the news, though, is that late on Friday, we got some news from the CDC. And one of the things we've talked about is the World Health Organization has issued an alert about a hepatitis-like illness in children that has arisen in different parts of the world, including the United States. So on Friday, the CDC comes out and says, hey, we actually have a limited study in Arkansas for some of these, a group of children that don't seem related in any particular way, very young. We're talking the median age, so the middle age of this group is just around 3 years old. And they're coming down with hepatitis, which is a condition with your liver. You have hepatitis A, B, and C. Oftentimes, you can be vaccinated against hepatitis A and B when you're just a baby. Hepatitis C, there's no vaccine, and this affects the liver. So they're seeing these children come in, and they're showing signs of what, as a parent, you might just think are normal stomach bug-like issues, right? They're having discomfort, they're having nausea, they're having all the tummy troubles, but they're also showing signs of jaundice. They're also showing signs of hepatitis. And some of these children actually had to have a liver transplant because of this. No one really knows what this virus is, particularly because it's not hepatitis A, B, or C. But the early clues seem to be suggesting that these children share one similarity, which is an adenovirus. This is like could be a typical respiratory virus. that, as I've heard from different doctors over the weekend, viruses can cause strange things to happen in your body. I mean, we have realized that through the pandemic. And so this is something that the CDC is aware of. They're issuing new research on. They're making sure that parents and pediatricians are aware of it. I want to pass it along to you, not because we want to be alarmed, unwarranted alarm, but we want to be aware that this is something that they're trying to track. A lot of you have asked questions about, is there any connection to COVID? Well, in some of the research, there seems to be a suggestion that this adenovirus and SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID, in some cases, it looks like the kids might have had a past infection, not necessarily this group in Arkansas, but in the broader group that is being looked at. There's more than just under 200 kids around the world that have had this. So, but we also know a lot of people have had exposure to SARS-CoV-2. So it's a little bit of a mystery, and it's a story that we're going to be watching. But hepatitis, you're going to be hearing a little bit about a hepatitis in the news. Also late on Friday, not to kind of put insult on injury here, but we also have the first confirmed case of the bird flu in a human in the United States and Colorado. So bird flu, avian flu, very contagious amongst birds. Poultry in particular often leads to the killing of a lot of poultry because it spreads so fast, can be so deadly to the birds. And it can transmit to humans. Rarely, but it can. And humans can transmit it as well. But again, and this is rare. It can lead to deaths in humans, also rare. But it's something that we have to be aware of, especially for people that are working with poultry. If you have, chicken in your backyard, something to be aware of. More than half of 50 U.S. states have evidence of bird flu in commercial and backyard birds. You also have more than 30 states that have found the avian flu in wild birds. So this is, again, something that we're aware of. The CDC issued this report, confirmed the case in Colorado. This person was working directly with poultry, culling a flock of birds that was exposed to bird flu. So there was exposure there. And again, something that we just want to always keep our eye on. We've learned our lesson over the last, couple of years that we're going to watch this. So I wanted you to be aware of that as well. The U.S. government is dealing with a lot of things, not just the pandemic. We're dealing with inflation. We're going to get some more news on inflation this week, dealing with immigration and also Ukraine. And I wanted to sort of step back here. Sometimes I want to give you day in and day out reports of play-by-play, but sometimes play-by-plays aren't as useful as sort of stepping back and looking at the news as sort of clumps together, because then you get an idea of actually what's actually transpiring in the world. And I wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about Ukraine. Late on Friday, the Pentagon had a press briefing, not unusual, but late on Friday, they ended up doing this and announcing that the training of Ukraine forces is going to resume in Germany. This is something that the United States has been doing for several years. There's precedent for this, but obviously stopped just at the end of February when the war kicked off in Ukraine. And so now the United States is resuming that. And that's really what the Pentagon press briefing was about. Just for context, we're about 60 days, just over 65 days into this conflict. So think about that. It doesn't seem like that long. It seems like both a really long time and not long at all. And there was this very rare moment in the press briefing. Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby, very composed. There's a lot of different styles of press secretaries. He's one of those guys that actually represents that he's always representing the Defense Department. They're always representing whatever department that they're fronting. But he does have a relationship that's warm with the press, and he tends to provide more information in his press briefings than you might get in others. I've watched him for years through different administrations, and he was asked a question about Ukraine at the end, and he got specifically about Vladimir Putin. He got very emotional. He got choked up talking about what was happening in Ukraine. That's unusual. You don't see that from him. And it was one of those moments where you had a real human moment in the middle of a lot of information that just made everybody pause to sort of take in, what are we really seeing? We sometimes gloss over what we're seeing in the world. We're very used to the images of the war, but the impact of it is real. And it certainly is for the people of Ukraine. And so, again, he doesn't, as he says, he doesn't represent all of the U.S. government, but he's an important figure in this. And so I think it's important to be aware of it. But the news could kind of get lost in that because there was a lot of attention to his emotion. We are doubling down on training Ukrainian forces. So here's kind of your clumps of information. Last week, the United States had the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State visit President of Ukraine in Kyiv. Big deal. These are the highest representatives of our government there. They announced the opening of the embassy, U.S. embassy in Ukraine, that it was going to take place. Today, on Monday, the U.S. embassy just reopened, not in Kyiv, but farther west. In another really big city. So we're reopening operations there. We also had House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the highest ranking member of Congress, visit with a delegation as well as other lawmakers, visit and meet with President Zelensky as well. So that also just happened this past weekend. So you have really high ranking people from the U.S. government going in. They're meeting with President Zelensky. This is taking place to be a show of unity. We're giving more tools to the Ukrainians. The president wants more money. Congress is going to be working on that this week. We're doing more training. So even though it seems like the news is sort of moved on in a lot of ways, the United States government is doing this series of things together, and that's taking place. It's also your money. If you're an American citizen, that's being used, tools and money being sent over to Eastern Europe. In the meantime, here's sort of the clump of information from Russia. You have a lot of high-profile interviews and statements from Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, the foreign minister as well. There's more talk about the possibility, the potential of more conflict, nuclear war. We're hearing those threats over the last several weeks, but we continue to hear them as well. You have missiles, even though the Russian forces have pulled out of the area around Kyiv, you had Russian missiles being fired into Kyiv, into that area last week as another sign of like, just so you know, we're still here. They're doubling down in the area. The Russians are doubling down in the eastern part of the country where they have previously been over the last several years. But they're continuing to really try to hold on to this area that I'm going to show you now. And it's a wide swath of area along the coast of Ukraine. We've talked about why that matters so much, because the Black Sea is so important to getting goods out of Ukraine and Russia and into the broader waterways. And you can see Russia has really tried to take this area. Russia already claims Crimea. They already claim a disputed area, and they're just sort of widening what they're trying to do in this particular part of the country. Although a lot of the focus is on the east, something very important I want to show you. This is taking place in the west. And it's a map that's showing you along the western border of Ukraine with Moldova. Apparently, there's Russian forces there. The Pentagon didn't go very far talking about this, but just that there's an awareness that Russia could be kind of in this other part of Ukraine. The reason why that matters is that you could potentially see a lot of pressure on that entire coastline, the entire southern part of Ukraine. And that would effectively landlock Ukraine. So, this is something that we really have to pay close attention to. So again, there seems to be the movement sort of past this story. I just want to make sure we see what Russian forces are doing. Right now, there's an evacuation in Mariupol that's taking place. In the past, evacuations of innocent civilians has not gone well. Russia has tentatively, reportedly agreed to these evacuations and then hit these, assets that are moving people out of the area. And this is what's taking place on Monday. So this is something I'm going to be very closely watching, because even though you have these two sides that remain in conflict, Ukraine and Russia, we also saw that prisoner swap last week between Russia and the United States. We're continuing to see at least some evacuations take place. And if that goes well, that would be new. So let's just keep an eye on what's happening here. It's just another sign. Let's keep an eye on what's happening here. Volatility in Eastern Europe has affected the stock market. We've seen things that this has affected the economy, oil prices, all of this plays into inflation and what's happening here at home. And just a word on that, just kind of revisiting the economy. The Federal Reserve is going to be meeting this week, and they're going to be looking at interest rates. So this is how expensive it is for you to borrow money. And there's anticipation they're going to raise rates, which would mean that it would become more expensive. If you're looking for a home equity line of credit, auto loan, that sort of thing. So a lot to watch. So that's kind of your big overview for Monday. Just want to mention this, Warren Buffett had his annual meeting. Warren Buffett, famed investor, the Oracle of Omaha. He bought his first stock at age 11. I wasn't doing anything like that at age 11. But people really look at him and what does he think about the economy? What does he think about different things? And he was talking about inflation. And one of the things he said, and I thought it was such a great message, I want to share it with you today. He said, the key to kind of overcoming inflation or an inflationary environment where there's a lot of pressure on the economy is to become really good at something. Because if you're really good at something, if you're the best dentist, if you're the best doctor, if you're the best mechanic, you're always going to have customers. You're always going to come to the top of the heap. And so he kind of followed up as like, well, how do you know what you're good at, right? We all want to be good at something, but we're like, what are we actually good at? And he said, you sort of stumble into it. You kind of stumble into it in life. You kind of figure it out. And I thought that was a really good message. I could sometimes get stuck into that, like, am I really good at it? If you took a look at this office, you would know I'm not good at cleaning. But there's always that self-doubt that creeps in. So that's good advice from Warren Buffett. And here's to a little stumbling this week. Productive stumbling. Let's hashtag that and share it on SmartHER News. So that's your lay of the land. Hope you have a great start to your week. I'll be back later this week with more news updates, but that's a big chunk. And I hope that helps explain a little bit about what's happening in the world and why it matters. And I'll keep you updated with more on smarternews.com. We have all these stories linked on there. And if you'd like to listen on podcast or YouTube, we also have those available as well. But have a great week, and I'll see you with more on SmartHER News. Bye, guys. Quick, concise, nonpartisan, SmartHER News, a refuge from the storm. I'm Jenna. Thank you for choosing SmartHER.